Hello. How are you all doing? Excellent. Bear with me just a second while I get these Petri dishes ready. Body parts, anyone? Okay. Okay. All right. Several years ago, I co-founded a company that pioneered the 3D printing, the 3D bioprinting of human tissues, body parts. And we've been able to make little human tissues, like little kidneys, little livers, lungs, blood vessels, and so on. And given this, people would come to us with all kinds of questions. They'd ask, can you make this body part? Can you make heart tissue? Can you make a new throat tissue? Can you make, and they'd get very, very creative. You can just imagine the kind of suggestions that people would come up with. And some people would even started to ask us, if you can make human body parts, could you also make animal products, like leather and meat? Now, at the time when someone first suggested this to me, our focus was very much just on medicine. And being highfalutin medical scientists, we said, look, we're focused on serious medical problems. We're serious scientists, and this is just too fringe for us. But then, the 3D bioprinting people saying that that's too fringe. But then as I started to think about it, I realized that tissue engineering could also solve very serious problems outside of medicine. And our global dependence on animals as a resource is a very serious problem indeed. I'm convinced that in 20 years' time, when we look back on today and on how we raise and slaughter billions of animals to make our hamburgers and our handbags, we will see what we do today as being wasteful, inhumane, and seriously problematic. We need to rethink this. Consider for a moment, today, with the world's population at 7 billion people, we depend on 60 billion land animals to provide us with our meat, dairy, eggs, and leather goods. And over the next 30 years, as the world's population expands to 10 billion, and as consumption rises predominantly in emerging markets, this will need to nearly double to 100 billion land animals. But the problem is, we're hitting planetary resource limits already today. Livestock is one of the most environmentally resource-intensive industries. And it consumes the most amount of land, directly and indirectly. It's one of the largest consumers of water, and is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gases, which drive climate change. On top of this, when you want to become much more efficient at producing livestock, and you concentrate your herds, it creates opportunities for disease, harm, and abuse. And so clearly we cannot continue on this path, which puts the environment, public health, and our food security at risk. So what can we do about it? We really need to pursue a combination of options, a combination of solutions. There's no any one silver bullet. Much like in the energy industry, where the growing global demand for energy has meant that we need to have demand-side solutions, we need to conserve energy, and we also need to develop better, sustainable alternatives for energy. The same thing needs to happen in animal protein. On the one hand, we need demand-side solutions. We should eat less meat. It would be great to encourage more people to adopt vegetarianism, veganism, flexitarian diets. And that's a fantastic thing to do. It's much more resource efficient. The problem with that, of course, is it's asking for behavioral change on a large scale. And we're not always so good at that, especially when a lot of the world is shifting more to a meat-based diet. What else can we do? Well, we can develop farming techniques that are more efficient. that are more sustainable, more humane. And that's absolutely worth doing, and there's lots of innovation happening. But we can't expect all the solutions just to come from incremental improvements in agriculture. And I would say agriculture is a rather mature technology. It's been around for over 10,000 years. And there's been certainly a lot of progress, but if you look at it, the way we farm our animals today versus how we farmed our animals 50 years ago is not night and day. It's not dramatically different. So what can we really expect here in the next 20 years? So what we also need is we need to develop better alternatives. And there's been a lot of innovation in this area. So if you would have walked into a grocery store 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, you wouldn't see this. You wouldn't see the tremendous diversity of meat alternatives that is available today. Today you have options ranging from soy to seitan and tempeh and tofu and all kinds of products in the meat alternatives category. And they're getting better all the time. And while there's a lot of innovation here, and it is getting significantly better, the limitation here is that meat alternatives that are plant-based still don't perfectly mimic or don't perfectly reproduce the experience of eating meat. They're getting better at reproducing the flavor, the texture, the mouthfeel, but it doesn't perfectly substitute the eating experience, the mouthfeel, and the nutritional qualities of meat. So there is another alternative. Because essentially, if you think about it, animal products are just collections of tissues. And right now, we raise highly complex animals to provide us with animal products that are, at the end of the day, made from relatively simple tissues. What if, instead of raising complex, sentient, living animals, we made animal products from what tissues are made of? The basic unit of life, the cell. And while this might sound like it's a dramatic new idea, it's actually a fairly old idea. As far back as the 1930s, 80 years ago, Churchill wrote about this idea. He said, if you think about it, the way we farm our animals is absurd. There should be a more efficient way to do this. And in fact, Churchill predicted that this would happen in 50 years. He thought that this was going to happen in 50 years. And Churchill certainly was directionally right. He was ahead of his time. And right now, medical science is slowly catching up to Churchill's vision. Within the last couple of decades, there's been a lot of progress in a field of medicine called regenerative medicine, also known as tissue engineering. I refer to these techniques as biofabrication. Now, what is biofabrication? It's basically making tissues and organs out of cells, growing cells to make tissues and organs. And already in medicine, biofabrication techniques have been used to grow sophisticated body parts. You have all no doubt read about cases, examples where doctors have been able to grow ears, windpipes, bone, blood vessels, skin, and so on, out of cells, out of tissues that have been successfully implanted into patients. And indeed, my first company is a company that is commercializing the technology to 3D print human tissues, which eventually will be used for replacement body parts for therapeutic applications. But in the near term, we're providing these little human tissues to pharmaceutical companies so that they have a better way of testing and developing new drugs. So if we have medical-grade human tissues, if we have medical-grade technologies that allow us to create biologically functional tissues that can be implanted into patients and have a positive medical outcome, then certainly creating textile-grade and food-grade tissues is easier. It's a much more solvable problem. And indeed, biofabrication can be a very, very powerful, sustainable, and scalable new industry outside of medicine. The net effect of applying biofabrication techniques to animal farming could be significantly positive from an environmental standpoint. So this was a study that was conducted by Hanna Tomisto at Oxford a couple of years ago, and It's been updated since. And it finds that culturing animal products, culturing meat, would be 99% more efficient in terms of land use, 96% more efficient in terms of water use, 96% more efficient, 96% fewer greenhouse gases, and about half as much energy as traditional raising and slaughtering animals. And so what would this process look like? Applied to meat, it looks as follows. You take the most perfect animal, and you take a biopsy from that animal, and it doesn't harm the animal. So it's just a small biopsy of the muscle and of the fat. You isolate the cells that you want to work with, and you multiply these cells in cell culture medium. This allows you to go from millions of cells to billions and billions of cells. And by some estimates, a single cow could literally feed, it could provide half the world's meat needs using this approach. So you multiply your cells, and then there's various methods right now of assembling those cells into muscle fibers, into contiguous tissues, which you would then assemble into meat, into muscle tissues that form the basis of meat. And then, of course, you'd have to work with a chef, a food scientist, to make it have the right texture, the right flavor, the right nutritional qualities, and then cook and eat. And while this might sound like science fiction, it's no longer science fiction. This has happened. Within the last 2 years, 2 years ago actually, at TEDMed, my father, who's my co-founder in my last company and my current company, spoke about the medical benefits of tissue engineering, of bioprinting, and then he got up on stage again and he did a little cooking demonstration. He unveiled a little pork chop that was made without killing a pig. He salt and peppered it, and he cooked it on a little hot plate and ate it in front of the audience. And he's still alive today. And over the summer, 2 months ago, Dr. Mark Post of the University of Maastricht unveiled the first cultured hamburger, which was presented at a London tasting event. And so there's been a lot of progress. So while there's still a lot of work to be done, the flavor is not yet there, the texture is not yet perfect, there needs to be more work on integrating the fat, on making sure that that this technology is scalable, it's affordable. There's a lot of technological development currently underway. But I believe that biofabrication is going to have its first breakthroughs not in meat. I'm very excited about meat, we're working on meat, but I don't think this is where the first breakthroughs are going to be. I think it's going to be in leather. And I think leather is very exciting. We have a long, long history. I know what you're all thinking. This is the Bay Area, after all. Leather, where the cruelty is optional. So leather is actually much simpler than meat. It's technically much simpler. We're dealing with mainly one cell type, skin cells, and it's primarily two-dimensional. Doesn't have the structural complexity of meat. And it is also much less polarizing for consumers and regulators. Because until biofabrication is better understood, it is clear that initially, at least, more people would be willing to wear novel materials than would be willing to eat novel foods, no matter how delicious. So in this sense, leather can be the place to start. It can be a beginning for the mainstream biofabrication industry. And if we succeed here, a lot of the technology is applicable to other fields as well, and it can be the beginning of biofabrication being applied to other applications like meat. So what does this process look like? Well, this should look very familiar to you at this point. Growing leather is very similar to growing meat. Again, you start with the most perfect, happy animal. You take a little skin biopsy. This animal, again, is not harmed in the process. And by the way, it does not need to be a cow. It can be an ostrich, a crocodile, any animal, however exotic, that you might want to make leather from. And you isolate the skin cells, and you expand them significantly in culture. So again, you go from millions of cells to billions. And here, what you're going for is you want these cells to produce collagen, because collagen is the main building block of leather. So as soon as you grow cells in sheets, these cells, as soon as they become confluent, they start producing lots and lots of collagen. And then what we do is, as soon as we have these cells grown in sheets producing collagen, we layer them together to form thicker sheets, kind of like phyllo pastry. And then once these sheets fuse together, it forms kind of a thicker, multi-layered skin, and then we tan it. And the tanning process for this is a much shorter, much less chemical tanning process than traditional leather. Why? Because you don't need to remove the hair, you don't need to remove the flesh, the fat, all the nasty chemicals that are required for those steps. Those are what are called beam house operations. You don't need to do that with this. And then you can make all kinds of fancy leather products from it. And so I'm very excited to show you leather samples that are fresh from our lab. And what's really exciting is that this is real leather. This is not fake. It's not synthetic leather. This is real, genuine leather made from skin cells. It has the biological structure of real leather. And better yet, what's great about this is that it can be made perfect every time. You don't need to remove the hair, the flesh, the fat. You don't need to deal with the imperfect shape or size of an animal. You don't need to deal with scars and insect bites. And in fact, this can be grown in the shape and size that you would need for a wallet, a handbag, or a car seat. So there's a lot less waste in this process as well. And because we grow this material from the ground up, we can control its composition and its properties in very interesting ways. So this is very thin leather. Have you seen leather like this, practically see-through? It's made just of a few layers of cells. And yet it's pretty robust. So it allows for a whole bunch of design permutations that have not been possible with leather traditionally. This is also a very kind of thin leather that has kind of a slight tanning to it, a slight dyeing to it. So from a design and a performance standpoint, there's a lot of properties that we can control. We can control its durability, its elasticity, its strength, its breathability, its waterproofness. There's a lot of aspects we can control because we make this material from the ground up. And with this kind of technology, we can imitate leather. We can do what today's leather does, but with imagination, probably much more. So let's talk for a minute about the past, present, and the future of animal products. Some would say that with this kind of technology, we're deviating too much from nature. There's too much technology involved in animal products. Well, I would argue this. Agriculture as a whole is one of the biggest technological interventions in nature. Think about this. The picture of an oryx that was painted on this cave wall, that animal no longer exists in nature. It went extinct. And its modern descendant, the cow, nowhere in the wild does that exist. It is a genetic experiment. Over centuries and centuries of selective breeding, we have today the various breeds of cattle that do not exist in nature, and oryx went extinct. Now, with this technology, it actually does not involve genetic modification. I should have said that. But in many respects, it is not more removed from nature than what we already do in agriculture. So what could the future of animal products look like? Well, it need not look like this. This is actually the state of the art today. This is what a slaughter facility looks like, a very well-run slaughter facility. And for most of you, if you have a chance to visit a slaughterhouse, probably your appetite is not going to, you're not going to want to go have a meal right afterwards. But imagine if the future of animal products could look like this. It could be a brewery, and it could operate in an urban center. And if you think about it, We've been culturing cells already for thousands of years. We've been using cell culture techniques to make things like wine, beer, and yogurt. This is an extension of that kind of technology. A brewery is essentially a bioreactor. It is where cell culture takes place. Now imagine that in this facility, instead of brewing beer, we were brewing leather or meat. And imagine being able to interact with this facility, going to see how the leather or the meat gets made. And this is in contrast. This could be open, it could be educational, it could operate in an urban center, in contrast to the hidden, guarded, and remote factories where leather and meat production takes place today. So perhaps biofabrication is a natural evolution of manufacturing for mankind. It allows us to be creative, designing new materials, new products, new facilities. It allows us to stop using animals as a resource and develop a process that is much more scalable, humane, and efficient, and more evolved. Perhaps we are ready for something literally and figuratively more cultured. Thank you.